we're actually at an inflection point, and there are lots of things that are already happening. So we need to really be mindful of how we bring people along with us, how we take care of issues around value chains, because most value chains are broken, and how we ensure that we have a functional food system that can actually feed people, but also sustain lives as well. So these are some of the big issues we're dealing with, and some of the big issues that have just transition implications, because the people that matter are not very often in rooms like this to really decide on what they want out of the transition. And so we have to be really careful about how we design, how we orient, and how we support the transition, so that those that are at the front, in the front line, do not end up losing doubly. So that's what I would say regarding the food system. And hand over to you. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Fatima. And now I'd like to pass the floor over to Mark Maslin.
Thank you very much. We have to remember that 7 million children die needlessly every year of preventable diseases and starvation. 825 million people go to bed feeling hungry every night, in a world where we produce enough food for 10 billion people, when we only have 8 billion on the planet. We also have to remember that 1 billion people still do not have safe access to fresh water. This is the state of the planet now, and we have to transition in a fair and just way to lift billions of people out of extreme poverty. One of the key things is, of course, energy poverty. At the moment, 80% of the world's energy is produced by fossil fuels. The estimates by many learned institutions is that we'll have to double the amount of energy we produce in the world by 2050, which will allow all of those people access for the energy they required for a safe, healthy life. Therefore, we have to generate 180% of the world's energy in clean, renewable, if we're going to do this transition properly. As Sir David said, key things are we need an agreement on loss and damage, because there is a historic legacy whereby we need to actually compensate the least developed countries for the damage they're already having. We need to fund adaptation, because farmers of the world, as Fatima has said, need our support to continue growing the food that is essential for the growing population. Another 2 billion people will be on the planet by 2050. And that 100 billion that we've promised since 2009, ratified in 2010, that we still in the Western world have not produced, is chicken feed. It is small change, but it's basically making us look like untrustworthy world partners. And the last thing I would like to pick up on in the report is the idea of infinite loss. Our economic system cannot calculate the cost of replacing the whole of the Great Barrier Reef. It cannot actually cost in the loss of the Asiatic cheetah, of which there are only 13 left in the world. It cannot do that. Our economics is broken, and we need to deal with the idea of not just loss, but infinite loss on this planet. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. So just to add a few things, humans tend to think in a linear fashion, right? We kind of look for trends and we assume they're happening sort of slowly, but we're not able to get our minds around the idea of exponential growth that well at all. We're not able to figure out, what nonlinear abruptness in a system means, and this is what we're experiencing in the climate system. It's a highly nonlinear system. We could very, very quickly, for example, lose the Arctic sea ice one summer, and Arctic temperatures will skyrocket, so the Arctic will become much, much warmer. The ice will take longer to form in the winter, start of winter, fall, winter. It will go much quicker in the spring. And so the Arctic being a much, much warmer place means that the jet streams will be much more disrupted, and therefore extreme weather events around the planet will greatly accelerate in intensity, duration, and frequency above and beyond, what we have now. In fact, in 5 or 10 years, we may look back at today's climate system and think of it as being a relatively stable system, because what we can have in 5-10 years is basically unrecognizable, and we'll have to learn how to grow enough food to feed the ever rising human population, and it's really a struggle for survival of humanity on this planet, but not just for humanity, but also for all the plants and animals, and everything we think of as a civilized society will be under threat. So, Fatima, would you like to add anything further?
No, perhaps what I wanted to say is I think Sir David talked about the whole aspect related to energy, and as I said before, this is an important sector where we can do quite a lot of ambitious reduction. But I also think that we can't go towards a just transition without taking into account the whole aspect of climate finance. The transition would not finance itself. There are big major investment that has to be made. I'm coming from an organization that works very much with countries in Africa. And many of these countries are very resource rich, and most of the resources are resources in energy and, I would say, hydrocarbon resources, oil and gas. These resources are going to become stranded. And when they become stranded, they would need to have some sort of alternative source of revenue. And those alternative sources of revenue will be important for the strategic development, not least the SDGs. So I think we need to really think about how we can ramp up support, especially support in terms of renewable. Renewables have a lot of benefits, but there are also problems in terms of storage and in terms of how we have a higher penetration of renewables in many of these countries, and we're not there yet. So I don't think we should be complacent and say we have got all the renewables we need and we can just sort of go on this pathway, because there are issues around renewables, and we should look at how we could support countries to ramp up their investments so that renewables become a lot easier than what they are now.
Yes, thank you very much for that. And I often say, we're all familiar with tipping points now, and most of them are negative, but we need to actually have tipping points in human understanding on how serious the climate crisis is, as well as tipping points in our action to adapt and mitigate and reduce the problem. So Mark, any final statements?
Certainly, and I hate to end one of these wonderful events actually quoting Tom Cruise, but actually I think the message for this COP is show me the money. Because again, as Fatima says, it's about climate finance. It is about the money in the world. We generate $88 trillion in the world every single year. It goes to a very small number of people. If you fairly shared that out and you had a just transition, suddenly you would have 10 billion people living a health, safety, safe, and probably much happier life in the future by 2050.
Thank you, Mark. And I, Paul Beckwith, on behalf of the Climate Emergency Forum, I wish to thank David and Fatima and Mark for very interesting discussions, and also the climate and the Climate Crisis Advisory Group, the CCAG group, as well as Sustainable Population Australia, for allowing us this session. So thank you for attending. Enjoy the rest of the COP.